After leveling every class to 25, I found that I generally don't agree with a lot of the feedback on Diablo 4. I think a lot of it's overblown, the UI is fine, the tone and setting of the world works for me, and the MMO-like elements of the game add a lot of variety between dungeons compared to many other ARPGs that I've played. Even the feedback about dungeons, which although is fair, has at least been addressed by the devs, where they assured us that there is a lot more variety in the full game, especially with sigils and nightmare keys, adding all kinds of affixes and mutations to the dungeons, as well as adding other events like the Butcher and the Loot Goblin, which are designed to quickly change players' priorities on the fly. Also, when talking about dungeon layouts, I have to think, how many times are we just going to sit there farming the same boss over and over again anyway? Although I will say, the one piece of feedback that is pretty hard to deny is the question of class balance. In the closed beta, people were pretty unhappy with the Barbarian. Even though it was usable with an overleveled item level at 25, it still felt overall much worse than the Rogue and the Sorcerer. And of course, it was assumed that this could easily be tweaked with some damage numbers here and there, although then the devs followed up last week in an interview confirming that they know that Barbarian is a little weaker in the lower levels, but at level 40 with more weapons in their arsenal, they become much stronger. And they added that there is a lot of balance there. But the trick around balance is that it's a balance over time, not a balance of the moment. Not all classes at level 5 should have the same power. Now, I was fairly happy with that answer, but then came along this week's open beta, where the Necromancer was instantly stronger than pretty much everything. Every skill is usable, and honestly, you barely have to think when you're playing it, up against the Druid, which is weak in just about every circumstance, and besides some really cool aspects for abilities later on, it is overall much weaker even than the Barbarian was. And if you don't believe me, just look at this clip comparing the Necromancer and the Druid from Asmongold, which really speaks for itself. This has led just about everybody to agree that Sorceress and Necro are easy and pretty overpowered. Both classes have very powerful builds that almost play by themselves, the Sorcerer with the Hydra and Ice Blade setup, and the Necromancer with the Mist Corpse Explosion, which although hilarious, is a little overtuned. Next up, everyone agrees that the Rogue is sitting in the middle, which is skillful, fun, but really strong. The Barbarian is challenging and rewarding, but it is definitely a little weak, again getting more powerful at level 25 when you get enough legendary aspects. And honestly, the Druid isn't even really on the scale. Again, you can mess around with some aspects, but if you put these all next to each other at any of the levels in the beta, the list is going to come out just about the same. Now, of course, not every class has to be exactly the same at each level, and I don't think anyone actually expects a game with hundreds of options for builds to be balanced from start to finish. But if they have the general skill level of the 5 classes so far apart, then there is definitely a reason for concern. I mean, right now, the classes are what, 2 or 3 times more powerful than others from 1 to 25? But for argument's sake, let's have a look at it from a different angle. We are currently overpowering these characters at level 25 in multiple ways. Loot drop rates are much higher than they will be in the full game, and if you played much after level 25, it's very likely your item level is nearer what it would be at level 30 or 35, especially if you've been farming that big dude on the left-hand side of the map. Now, during launch, without the level 25 cap, we would actually keep leveling and the monsters would keep leveling with us rather than staying the same level and pushing our power higher and higher. Because of the way level scaling works, with us and the monsters not progressing in levels, but our eye level progressing, the power gap is getting way more than it would naturally be in the leveling process come release. We have to consider that this does work both ways though. Not only are we overpowering the Sorceress and Necro, which look really strong, we're also doing the same to Druid, and people are really trying to justify the Druid builds by saying, hey, look what they can do at 25. The issue with that is what they can do at 25 versus the other classes is still massively undertuned. Another thing to consider is that Druids do not get access to their specialization in the beta. Because of the location of the Druid quest, we simply don't know how strong or not it's going to be when it's included. Come launch, you won't just be locked into Fractured Peaks, so Druids will be able to get their specialization right away, likely making them much stronger stronger and hopefully making them at least as good as the barbarian. And the last thing to consider as well is that there are actually 3 tiers of items above legendary that are going to completely change each class. Specifically, uniques in the game are said to be build defining along the same line as set bonuses in D3. Without those, we're really just scratching the surface of what's possible with various build combos. Beyond that, we also have the Paragon board, further adding power progression that we have not seen yet as of the beta. There was an endgame beta and some of it was leaked, but all of that content is still under NDA, so we still don't know exactly how it's all going to work. So here's the thing. Even though it's fine for classes to have different power and skill levels, it probably shouldn't be as glaring in the game as it currently is. Even the devs themselves said in an interview that they don't want people choosing a class based on power, but rather on what they would love to play, saying in general, there are no classes that are for the only really skilled people. When you see that campfire lineup, it's not just mechanics you're choosing, it's also the class fantasy. So if you have, for example, a fantasy of being a rogue, we don't want you to pick rogue because that character looks really cool, and then for us to come back and say, oh no, that's actually for the people who have 60 hours of Diablo. So I do think it's reasonable to expect them to balance things differently. The power level they are talking about is pretty extreme, and expecting people to get to level 50 or 100 or to be doing endgame dungeons to feel as strong as another class will lead to a lot of people's decisions being dictated by power and not the fantasy. I think really it comes down to how balanced it is when the game comes out, but also how long do we even expect it to take from level 1 to max? I mean, if it's not that long in the grand scheme of things in 2 years time, 1 to 100 really doesn't mean anything. If one of the classes is a little stronger or weaker, but only early on, it's not going to be a big deal. It's only a big deal on launch when a lot of people are coming into the game expecting to play the game a little differently from how the hardcore elites will when they're grinding all of their endgame dungeons. I mean, honestly, this may be one of the least balanced games I've ever played. I mean, I've seen more overpowered things in games, but just the power level from the weakest to the strongest and how they feel against each other early game is huge. And even though I agree that that might not be an issue at the end game, how many players may Blizzard lose along the way, or again, against their own wishes, have people picking their classes dependent on the power, but not who they want to play. So guys, that's about gonna wrap it up from me. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below. Are you one of the people that don't think this is a big deal, or would you just like the base experience to feel a little close together? I know that there's a few different competing crowds here, which is why the opinions are so varied on it, but I think we looked at a lot of the different angles and how these things play off of each other. Anyways, let me know what you think. Be sure to drop a like, as it does help us out and lets us know you're enjoying the content. Be sure to hit that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that you get notified when our videos go live. Have a great day as always. Take care and peace, people.